Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first high-level debate of the 2024 Public Forum. I am Javier Gutierrez, Counselor on External Relations here at the WTO and the team leader for the Public Forum. The 2024 Public Forum is a call to action, an invitation for us all to rethink and reshape globalization so that it truly leaves no one behind. Today, it is my privilege to introduce a conversation organized by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, focusing on one of the most pressing challenges facing the multilateral trading system today. This is how to navigate geopolitics. Earlier today, during the launch of the WTO's flagship publication, the World Trade Report, we heard from our chief economist about the intricate links between trade and inclusiveness across economies. Now, we turn to a distinguished panel of thought leaders who will explore how trade can remain a source of opportunity, jobs, and peaceful development despite rising geopolitical tensions. We hope that their ideas and insights will resonate far beyond the Centre William Rappard here in Geneva and inspire action across the globe. Together, we can ensure that reglobalization leads to better trade for a better world. Now, before we proceed with today's panel, it is my honor to invite the Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, to the lectern. Madam Director General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Javier. For those of you who don't know, he's the miracle worker who put the public forum together with his team. Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what I know will be one of the most thought-provoking discussions this week. And I expected this hall to be packed full, and it is. You know, to have a panel like this is so unusual. This is the creme de la creme of trade. You know, honestly speaking, so if you're in this hall, you're just going to be treated to something really special. And for that, I want to thank the Peterson Institute, because this is also the first time another organization is organizing a panel at the public forum. And they didn't, we owe a special thanks to Adam Posen, the president of PIIE, and he didn't spare any effort to try and get this panel together. You recognize them by name. Having Richard moderate the panel, wow. So welcome to all the panelists. And in case some of you are unfamiliar with the Peterson Institute, it's a Washington-based research organization, nonprofit, nonpartisan, and I quote, dedicated to strengthening prosperity and human welfare in the global economy through expert analysis and practical policy solutions. In every ranking of economics think tanks, from Prospect Magazine or the University of Pennsylvania, the Peterson Institute figures at or near the top. It has been a turbulent few years for the trade policy community. Throughout it all, the top-notch experts at Peterson have provided fact-based, data-driven, and historically informed analysis to help us make sense of what's going on and better understand what is at stake for people's economic prospects, both within the United States and around the world. They are fearless, and that's what I like. They don't pander to anyone. They just tell it the way it is, and I hope we can be the same at the WTO. We try to be the same. At a time of rising skepticism about trade, the Peterson Institute's president, Adam Posen, has been one of the most trenchant defenders of open global markets, anchored in multilateral cooperation at the WTO. The Peterson Institute was fostering wide-ranging but informed debate on trade long before it became fashionable. Already back in 1997, it published Danny Roderick's monograph, wondering whether globalization had gone too far. Our topic today Geopolitics and Trade comes straight from the headlines, but it's anything but new. A century ago, failures to manage geopolitical tensions upended global trade and a great deal else. In the years ahead, a great deal will hinge on whether we can successfully use existing multilateral institutions to channel superpower competition into positive sum outcomes that can also attract broad-based international support, as Murray Upsfeld recently put in a Peterson brief. I really quote Peterson a lot, including their numbers, maybe too much. I'm really excited about the panelists, you know all of them, from Cecilia to Xiaoxun, who's come to join us, and Annabelle, another former DDG. Someone said if former DDGs are coming back, then something good must be happening. And maybe I'll say yes. And then we've got Mari. I mean, anyone who doesn't know Mari Pangestu, forget it. You're missing something. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Richard and say I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
We were instructed what to do with the microphones, but I forgot already. So, many people think trade is deglobalizing, but I think that's just lazy thinking. It's not ending, it's evolving. And very much the WTO's just like that. Many people who don't understand what's going on in this house think the WTO is dead or dying. That's just lazy thinking. Its mission's changing, its organization is changing, its operation is changing to adapt to the world which has fundamentally changed. Today, this panel, an astounding set of speakers, I'm going to just say their names and their places, we're going to address the deglobalization in the world of geopolitical tensions, which is vibrant and something we feel all the time. So, in order, Annabelle Gonzalez is Vice President for Countries of Inter-American Development Bank. This is in my list anyways. Xie Xunyi is former DG of the World Trade Organization and former Chinese ambassador. Cecile Malmström is a non-resident senior fellow at Peterson Institute and the ex-EU Trade Commissioner. Adam Posen is the president of PIIE and an ex-member of the Bank of England's monetary policy. Marie Pengensu is a professor at the University of Indonesia and an ex-Indonesian trade minister. As you can see, they're all scholars with practical experience in government who've actually sat on the other side of the table and tried to make things better. So I'm going to go in the order I announced, with Annabelle starting. 6 minutes each, please.
Thank you very much, Richard, Director General. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with this great panel and with all of you. The WTO is home for me, so it's always good to be back. Opportunity. That was the word that Peter Sutherland, the first WTO Director General, used to describe the creation of the new global framework to govern trading goods and services back in 1994. He referred to opportunity to expand trade, economic growth and employment, opportunity to support sustainable development, and he said the most important opportunity in 50 years to establish the basis for global economic cooperation. So fast forward to today, and the WTO and its rules continue to be as crucial in helping nations to tap into new sources of trade growth, use trade instruments to tackle global challenges such as climate change, and de-escalate trade tensions. But amid heightened geopolitics, key players' commitments to economic interdependence has waned, chipping away at some of the fundamental principles of global trade governance and making it harder to achieve sustainable economic convergence, particularly for those at the periphery, be it people, businesses, or even entire countries. So 30 years after its inception, and this is my main message today, it is time to reignite the spirit of cooperation that inspired the creation of the WTO, this time to support reglobalization to make trade more inclusive and equitable. Now, inaction, complacency, or waiting for a sudden change of heart will not do the trick. Restoring the collaboration mood requires bold measures. First, to reclaim the role of trade policy as a catalyst for economic growth and development. Second, to rebalance national security concerns. And third, a tangible commitment to rebuild trust and update the WTO rulebook to today's realities. And let me say a quick word on each of these points. First, on reclaiming the role of trade policy as a driver of growth. In today's world, trade policy is all too often used to achieve other domestic goals, including some that may be commendable. However, the effectiveness of using tariffs, subsidies, and other trade instruments to achieve geopolitical, climate goals or technological supremacy objectives is mixed at best. One thing we know for clear, making trade more difficult does not make it less costly. And as colleagues in the Peterson have shown, it is mostly consumers, often the most vulnerable, that end up paying the highest price. Also, evidence confirms that those that are sitting at the end of these retaliatory measures will not sit idle. They will retaliate, tit-for-tat measures, and with this will come increasing tension. Now, we also know that over the past 30 years, trade has consistently driven economic growth, including particularly in many developing countries. Yet, this heightened uncertainty and tensions have dampened the expansion of commerce over the past few years. And while resilient, in 2024, for example, it is expected that trade will be well below average rates in the decades preceding the pandemic. So it's important that policymakers reclaim this role of trade policy as a driver of economic growth, starting by fully utilizing the WTO to safeguard openness and certainty in the trading system. So that's point one. Point two is balancing national security and trade. While national security and increased threats implicit in excessive concentration of production or certain disruptive technologies are a legitimate concerns for governments, it is also the case that an expanding definition of security risks distorting trade and subjects the WTO to increased tension. Professor Daniel Dressner recently argued that the more items that are added to the national security basket, the harder it is for policymakers to center on what is truly important in foreign policy, advocating for a right-sizing of national security. Given that the WTO's role in preventing trade tensions from escalating into larger conflicts is very important, this concept of right-sizing resonates even more. This, in turn, could ease the way in finding pragmatic tools to foster greater transparency and mutual understanding of the rationales and merits of trade measures driven by security concerns. And my third and last point is reforming the WTO for today's world. The WTO needs important reforms to remain effective, and those reforms have already started. One is to strengthen the disciplines addressing trade-distorting policies like subsidies, including by considering whether some special measures may be required to address different economic systems. Another one is to bring greater flexibility to the way in which the WTO works by facilitating negotiations among group of countries in plurilateral agreements. The WTO, like a tall building, needs flexible structures to be able to withstand earthquakes and storms. Yet another reform that is important is promoting initiatives that are growth enabling, particularly for developing countries focused on the green, digital, and inclusive trade. Lastly, the WTO dispute settlement system must be restored for full functionality. So in concluding, Richard, I want to say that under Peter Sutherland, the WTO became a platform for opportunity. 30 years later, under the leadership of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the WTO must evolve into a renewed source for opportunity through reglobalization, ensuring that trade benefits more people, more businesses, and more nations, leaving none behind. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Thank you very much, Minister. So that's the 3 R's: reignite, resize, and reform.
There you go.
Tremendous. Xiao Sheng-yi, can I get you to put your 6 minutes? Let's everybody turn your mics on so we don't have the, yeah, please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I also want to thank PIIE and the WTO for their kind invitation because like Annabelle, WTO is also my home. I very much agree with the focus of today's panel, the need to look beyond current geopolitical tensions and to recognize that the silent majority of WTO members want to expand their trade, accelerate their growth, and strengthen the rules-based system. Let me offer 3 observations to back that up. First, the US and other major economies no longer dominate the global trading system because of rapid growth of developing economies in the last decades. Power in the global economy has become much more diffused, and that trend will only continue. If the largest economies want to focus on geopolitical competition or are reluctant to take part in further trade liberalization, that's no reason why the other 160+ members of the WTO should be held back, sit on their hands, and put their own trade interests on hold. They have every reason to continue engaging with other partners, negotiating new agreements, and expanding their trade opportunities. Which brings me to my second point, that small and middle-sized economies are more dependent on trade than larger economies. And they have a greater stake in strengthening an open, rules-based global trading system. The sheer size of and the diversity of the US and the EU economies makes them more self-sufficient. But for smaller, less diversified economies, like Singapore or the UAE, keeping global trade open is a necessity, not an option. Their trade relations are often global in scope and balanced between East and West, North and South. And they are highly dependent on a rules-based economic order and highly skeptical of calls to return to power-based relations. The majority of WTO members have no interest in seeing the WTO weaken, in watching global trade fragment into rival blocs, and in having to choose sides. Their goal is to navigate around today's geopolitical fault lines while continuing to trade with everyone. So my third point is that the best way to demonstrate why open global trade works and why protectionism, decoupling, and economic nationalism doesn't is for the bulk of WTO members, the newly empowered middle, to advance a new trade agenda aimed at opening markets, expanding trade opportunities, advancing structural reform, and writing new rules of the road for green, digital, and services economy of the future, all with the goal of reviving trade-led growth and development. We are already seeing this happen in the WTO with the success of the open plurilateral JSIs on investment, e-commerce, and services. Their extraordinary dynamism, rapid expansion, and fast progress over the last several years is concrete proof that the most countries still recognize the economic benefits of trade cooperation and the huge costs of being left behind. Creating a dynamic, forward-looking, growth-focused WTO is the best antidote to fragmentation. In short, the current geopolitical crisis need not spell the end of globalization or multilateral trading system underpinning it. In fact, like past crises, it can be a wake-up call and an opportunity to set out a vision of re-globalization and of a more flexible, multipolar, multi-speed WTO that can help deliver it.
Thank you very much for that, Minister Yi. Thank you very much for that, Shishong. Two more buzzwords, silent majority and newly empowered middle, that are the ones who should take the leadership and move it through the short-run geopolitical problems. Thank you very much for that. Now, the next on the list, I'm just following what they said I should do here. So the next on my list is Cecile Malmström. Please.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here again. This week, Brussels and in many capitals of the European Union, and maybe somewhere else as well, people are eagerly waiting for the declaration of who will be the next trade commissioner. This will hopefully be announced tomorrow when Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, will present her team. There will be 26 other commissioners, of course, but here I think the trade commissioner is important. So that portfolio is going to be very difficult, independently of who has it. That person has to navigate between keeping markets open and the pressure that is to also be defending the strategic autonomy of the European Union. And then, of course, you have all the geopolitical challenges that Europe and the world is facing. We have the war in Ukraine, obviously. We have Europe being squeezed a bit between China and the US. We have industrial policies. We have to prepare for whoever sits in the White House and the need to address the absence of global rules. And last, but certainly not least, we have the whole challenge of climate change, which is crucial for humanity, and the discussion of what role can trade play in all this. So EU is in many ways a superpower in trade. It has trade agreements with more than any other partner in the world, but it has to use them. The EU now, under the leadership of the new trade commissioner, has to show that open strategic autonomy is only possible if you work with friends and allies, and if you use that alliance that a trade agreement and trade cooperation creates. We know here in this room that trade unites people. Apart from the growth and investment and job creating, it also creates new possibilities for cooperation in a variety of areas. Those possibilities and links need to be used wisely and show how trade can be done sustainable. That's why the EU has to develop the existing free trade agreement and make sure to finalize the ongoing one. The one agreement with Mercosur, obviously, but also finalize negotiations with Australia, with Indonesia, and the ongoing discussions with India. It must also think broader. There is, in other parts of the world where the discussion is a little bit different than in the EU and US, the Indo-Pacific, where the CPTPP, another acronym here, is developing to be a quite dynamic cooperation. In my view, the EU should seek to either join fully or at least align and seek cooperation. This is an area that is dynamic, that is developing its own rules and trying to put sustainable trade forward. It is also a group where 12 countries are members. The UK just joined, and there are many countries, China and others, who have sent in their application. This would be a way for the European Union to contribute to develop those rules and trading systems in that part of the world, which is quite big right now, but also putting pressure on the US, because it will obviously not be in there, even if originally this was a US idea. Nobody really knows what will happen in the US the coming month. So the EU needs to plan to what is doable, what can we do? Whoever sits in the White House, the US is a partner, but probably that engagement with the European Union will be limited for a time being. There might be massive tariffs struck on Europe and the rest of the world, then we need, of course, to respond to this. If it is possible to develop cooperation in the Trade and Technology Council, in export controls, conformity assessment, green trades, so be it. That is very good, but I think we need to realize that for some time, maybe only 2 years, maybe 4 years, that possibility of cooperation will be limited. The EU has conflicts with China as well. We have now the recent tariffs on electric vehicles and other disagreements in trade and geopolitics. They are there, but I think it would be important for the EU not to escalate those conflicts. We do not need increasing trade wars, but also not accept bullying and non-fair play either. So hopefully the EU can show a way to a credible trade policy and build alliances with other partners than only China and the US. What does that mean for the WTO? I have been hearing complaints here that the EU is disengaging a little bit from the WTO. I think that is not correct. The EU really wants to reform, strengthen, modernize, and be an active partner in the WTO, and is active in the multilateral system, took the initiative to create an ad hoc body for dispute settlement. Of course, this is only ad hoc, so we need to keep on working with those partners who are there. And hopefully, as Annabelle said, we can take a new, fresh look at the coalition of those who are willing, big countries, small countries, north, south, wherever, to really try to see what is feasible to do. We will not achieve everything, but we can achieve, as the daily work that many of you ambassadors do here every week. The most urgent things, apart from finding a solution to the appellate body, is to find a deal, a way to deal with subsidies on the one hand and the greening of trade on the other hand. We need to find a way to define what is a good subsidy, what is a bad subsidy. I know that there are rules already existing, but they need to be updated and articulated in a better way. And that needs to be done in cooperation with other international organizations. On green trade as well, trade can be a formidable tool to achieve the net zero emission and the climate adjustment. But we need to be careful not to create new tensions that we are doing today with the different ways of pricing carbon, and where there are 37 different jurisdictions as well, and to make sure that the whole world can actually comply with these regulations, because today that is creating tensions. There are initiatives being developed within the WTO, plurilaterals. Some of them are not moving so far, so that has led other countries, mainly in the Pacific, but also in Latin America, to take initiatives on digital trade and on green goods and services. They are mini plurilateral in a way, but they are in accordance with WTO rules. Maybe this is a way to show the way and to put new dynamism in the WTO relations, and I think the European Union should seek to join these agreements as well. And the very final thing, of course, is to speak up for trade. We don't have to do it in this room. I think most people are convinced about the benefits of trade, but today trade has become a dirty word, and that is something where politicians, academics, leaders like all of us in this room have a responsibility to counter that narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Cecile. Thank you for that, Commissioner Malmström. Let me just point out that the EU is actually a collection of these silent majority middle powers. And if the middle powers are going to get together and do something, it will be with organizations. So speaking about the EU, as you know better than anybody, it is not a monolith when it comes to trade. So it really is a way of organizing the thinking of many of the countries who have the same aspirations of going forward. So I'm going to move on to Marie next. Can you turn your microphone on?
I thought,
Oh, did I miss?
No,
I'm
no.
sorry, I missed Adam. Sorry. Yeah.
we deliberately have it so Marie gets the last word.
Okay, good. So Adam, who's my boss at the Peterson Institute, actually. So Adam, please.
Thank you, Richard. Let me say, even discounting the most generous remarks of the Director General, how proud we are at the Peterson Institute to be so visibly partnering with the WTO, with the marvelous work that Javier and Bernard and the team have done for this public forum. This is just one more indication of how forward-looking, dynamic, self-critical, open, all the attributes we want from a public-spirited institution are being displayed by the WTO these days and by its Director General. I am very proud that my colleagues, who I also am very honored to be with, were here to work with and support the efforts of a leader we admire who combines the intellectual, the political, and the organizational in Ngozi. Speaking of leader, so I'm the American, the US American on the panel. Tomorrow you'll hear my colleague Jason Furman. There are others, Alan Wolf, Robert Lawrence, other friends from America, from Peterson here. There's an old American expression. Some people say it comes from Thomas Paine. Some people say it comes from George Patton. Either way, lead, follow, or get out of the way. I think it is time that the third nations say to the US and frankly China, you're not leading, you're not following, get out of the way. And I don't say this facetiously, I say this to stiffen the spines of the many people in this room. And it's very much in the spirit of something that's been running through Richard's masterful moderation from Abigail right through everyone, which is this is the era of, let's call it, the third nations. They might be big or an amalgamation like the EU. They might be Singapore. They might be Ireland within the EU. They might be Kenya. But you have a voice and a role. And to be ambitious, there are many ways that the WTO working with those third nations can make a difference. And as the Director General has repeatedly said, the goal is results. I think we want to focus the WTO, in my view, on three parts of its mission in this effort. Some of this has already been said by my colleagues, all three of my preceding colleagues. The first is you should stand by the fact that you're providing services, genuinely useful services, to the members. That includes dispute issues. It's not limited to dispute issues. And within dispute issues, it's not limited to dispute settlement and adjudication. As I know the Director General and others have said multiple times, and we see this with divorce and with business contracts and so on. It's not you either agree or you go to the highest court. Sometimes you negotiate, sometimes you arbitrate, sometimes you facilitate. There is a huge role for the WTO to continue to do all these things, as well as services. We saw today the World Trade Report, important research, useful information. I think the second point, which has been running through all this, and this may sound somewhat paradoxical, but I think the WTO does have to be strongly encouraging of the plurilateral in the multilateral spirit. And this goes to the combination of cooperation and rules-based that Annabelle and Xiaojun have both mentioned. That the action, the constructive action is, it was mentioned the plurilateral JSIs, it was these other deals that are being made. To the extent that the WTO's support and engagement brings these deals to be more open, to be at a higher standard, to be more rules-based and transparent, it is a win-win for everyone. And the WTO, I'm not saying its leadership is, but the WTO should not be threatened if there's some interregnum of 2, 3, 4 years where its main action is in helping that and not necessarily in the grand multilateral rounds or pure multilateralism. That's how you get back there. Third, I'm sorry, I'm not playing with my phone, I'm looking at my notes. Third, and this is a place where the Peterson Institute hopes to help, is speaking truth to power, as we've done about the costs of trade fragmentation, as many of you have, and tracking. There isn't quite the same level of surveillance that we have in some other fields, Richard's colleague at IMD, Simon Evenet, and his team, of course, is doing wonderful work. There are others, but the WTO can continue to speak truth to power on that. Now, I think that, and this is the place where I probably most differ from the current WTO views, I think that there is a case to be narrowing. Some of the so-called reform and modernization of the WTO is about getting into all these exciting new issues of digital and green and so on. I think every time the WTO engages in those rather than in trade per se and process, it has to think, am I doing this in order to have a seat at the table? Am I doing this just to say I'm doing something on green, say I'm doing something on digital, or am I really helping? And I don't deny that there are many places the WTO can really help, and it's obviously helping, particularly in digital trade right now. I just want to emphasize that don't make the mistakes of the IMF and the World Bank and some of the other organizations who insist that they have to be in a chair at every table and end up wandering from their mandates. Let me close with just a little bit about the U.S. As Cecilia, I think, well, no, Mari too, and Annabelle, so many people who've served in political appointed positions, elections unfortunately matter. Don't quote me on that. Particularly U.S. elections, unfortunately. I remain hopeful in the very following sense, that, that's my timer, that whether it's 2 years from now or 4 years from now or 6 years from now, but probably not beyond that, the U.S. will be returning to globalization and trade and multilateralism in a meaningful way. Obviously, if Harris wins, it's more likely it's 2 years from now than if Trump wins. But the point I want to say to all of you is do not be afraid to build without the U.S. Treat the U.S. as many of your nation states were treated in the past. That, oh, we're creating a club that you want to get into. Your maximum reform is to get you into that club, to get you admitted to the WTO, as China went through. Create a world, a system like CPTPP has done, where the U.S. wants in. The U.S. has to catch up. And that's the best and most peaceful way to get us back. So do the right thing, and you will be rewarded. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for that, Adam. I don't dare summarize it.
That's beyond damning with faint praise, Richard.
But I do think in the second round that we're going to pick up that theme of lead, follow, or get out of the way, and speak truth to the power. Next, we have Mary Minister Pengasu, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Richard. And it's so great to be back here in the WTO, where I guess we spent many hours and years doing all kinds of negotiations in this very room. And it's great to be here with Director General Ngozi and to be on this amazing panel. I thought that I would take the perspective of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and try to describe a little about the way forward, picking up on the themes from my colleagues about lead, follow, or get out of the way, and middle powers need to take action. Because I think we have to take as given that the US coming back to lead us on the global economic order can be 2 years, 4 years, we don't know. We shouldn't try to guess. And we should also know that whoever's in government in the U.S. is still going to have, we're still going to have the U.S.-China tensions, and we're still going to have the continued nexus between economic security and technology. So that's the given. So it's very important that the non-G2 world, the middle powers, need to continue the process of keeping trade and investment open and maintaining the rules-based international order, recognizing the nexus and the challenges. This is the way East Asia, Southeast Asia is trying to function. navigating all this. And the way ahead is something what I have been calling constructive incrementalism. It's a better word than keeping the bicycle moving that Fred Bergston used to be so famous for. So it's basically a multi-prong, multi-pathway in the different processes, including the WTO. Let me just say why there should be shared interest for middle powers to continue this process. One is we have to navigate this economic security and technology nexus. We need to keep the garden small and really have a better definition of the high fence. We need to continue to grow with trade and investment. I think Annabelle emphasized how trade has really been important for development. East Asia and Southeast Asia definitely understands this. For the last 3 decades, we've been able to grow and develop, reduce poverty and all that because of the open and rules-based trading system. We need to manage the defragmentation that's going on. What does resilient supply chains mean anyway? We need to actually have a better definition of that. And we need to mobilize and navigate all these different platforms to be able to come to force. Let me give you 6 ideas. First of all, how do we manage trade and security nexus? How to define the small garden and the high wall? Within the WTO dispute settlement process, we actually have had recent WTO dispute settlement cases against the US on invocation of national security exception, or Article 21. The problem is that the appeals are going into the void, and US is basically disregarding it. So I'm just emphasizing the importance of really still addressing the reforms in the dispute settlement appellate body reforms, because otherwise it will go to the void. And it's bad demonstration effect, including for developing countries who are facing similar disputes and said, oh, well, we'll just do what the US does. It goes, the appeal goes into the void. The WTO reforms on dispute settlement is key. How to better define and codify the use of security exceptions in Article 21. And another suggestion which I heard from Bernard Hochman and Petros was to create a new trade policy platform just to share a transparency exercise where governments who want to invoke security exceptions should be sharing it and be able to be questioned about the objective, about the instrument used and the unintended objectives. This is just a suggestion, just giving you some suggestions of a way forward. The third idea is codifying and taking stance on national security exceptions in regional agreements. So it's a building blocks ideas, such as RCEP or CPTPP, or even discuss it in a non-binding way in other fora, such as APEC or IPEF. The other 5 ideas are, how do you keep trade and investment open? First of all, WTO reform agenda and how to keep WTO fit for purpose, as what is often termed. The middle powers, I think Xiaoqun had this point, the middle powers need to keep the momentum going on results coming out of the WTO meetings, as well as continuing on the reform agenda, including the dispute settlement and other issues. I do think subsidies is an important issue. When I was at the bank, we worked with WTO as well as OECD and IMF on, let's look at this subsidies issue, because subsidies can only be addressed multilaterally. Swisher subsidies was a good outcome, but we need to do more. We know that there's no more single undertaking, so the flexible structure that all of you have talked about is very important. And I think this is up to the middle powers as well as large, small middle powers. I think the EU would be very important. On plurilateral agreements, totally agree on that. Let's reflect on past plurilateral agreements and what are the types of plurilateral agreements we want. The government procurement agreement is plurilateral, but it's non-MFN. The ITA, which is my favorite example, what came out of APEC. A core group of countries came in and brought it to the WTO for negotiations, and it's MFN. And now we have a number of plurilateral agreements trying to happen through the joint initiatives as well as the trade, the investment facilitation for development agreement. One is on e-commerce, as we know that's already apparently been completed, and the services. But they're not yet WTO agreements. They're all trying to become WTO agreements. And I think there's the big area of discussion. How do we actually make this be part of the WTO agreement? The fourth idea is plurilateral frameworks mirroring the WTO. This is the multi-party interim appeal arbitration, or MPIA for short. It has already 53 WTO members, led by middle powers, EU and Canada, and members include China and a number of ASEAN countries like Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. There are already 4 ongoing disputes involving China, and 1 concluded case, Colombia and a few European countries. So what we're trying to do in Southeast Asia is to actually get ASEAN to sign on, more ASEAN countries to sign on to MPA, for instance. Finally, we need to do the building blocks idea, which is the keeping the bicycles moving. Bilateral and regional agreements and arrangements. Open regionalism has become kind of a buzzword, or trying to be implemented in spirit as well as in the regional agreements that we have in East Asia. We have the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement of East Asia, and we have the CPTPP. And they are doing more, they're dealing with more issues than what is being dealt with in the WTO. So they could be building blocks. But more importantly, we are going to try to prioritize strengthening these regional agreements, because it is going to be part of the answer to reshaping the value chain in a regional value chain, which hopefully is not a closed value chain, but an open regionalism, open value chain. Let me stop there. Those were some just concrete ideas on the way forward.
Thank you very much. So again, we heard the idea that the middle powers need to take the lead, to keep the lights on, so to speak. And we've heard many different ways of saying it. Xiao Xi said the silent majority, the newly empowered middle, the best way is to keep the movement forward there. Ideas going forward with regionalism, going forward with the joint studies initiatives, or like Adam's, multilateralism in the plurilateral spirit. Having
Other way
followed,
around.
did I get it? The other plurilateralism with the multilateral spirit. Okay, so I've been in this business a long time, and I'm not sure I've actually heard that combination of things. But the plurilateralism with a multilateral spirit. Now, what I'd like to do in the second round is let's be concrete. How does the silent majority, how do the middle powers keep the engine turning over and making progress in concrete ways? What are the initiatives? Is it Marie, you gave a number of examples, but let's go through them. And I'd like to turn to Annabelle, Cecile, and Marie again, and then open it to the discussion, if that's right. So Annabelle, if you want, please be concrete. And if I can just say one more thing. There is an elephant in the room that's not up here, and that's India. So is India a middle power? Is India a superpower? So if you, in your wisdom, can address how does India fit into this new world where the middle powers moves over? I guess if EU could be a middle power, I think India could be a middle power too, at least for a little while longer. But anyways, Annabelle, please start.
So I'll leave Adam's wisdom to refer to India, middle power. I will focus my comments on Latin America, and briefly to say that for Latin American countries and the Caribbean, these are countries that need trade to drive productivity growth, innovation, and economic diversification. But the world also needs Latin American countries. You need Latin America because Latin America is key for global food security, feeds 1.3 billion people in the world. It also needs Latin America and the Caribbean in the fight against climate change and in the preservation of biodiversity. LAC also holds 20% of the world's critical minerals, so that's important. It can also play a very important role in the resilience and diversification of supply chains. So this is why an environment of economic global fragmentation is very detrimental to the region. And this is why the region is one of those groups of countries that I would say actually acts very much in the WTO to strengthen the system. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples what is being done and a couple more what I think can be done. In terms of what is being done, Latin American countries and the Caribbean play an active role in shepherding some of these joint statement initiatives, with Chile, for example, co-sponsoring the initiative of an investment facilitation. They also chair a number of the regular committees. They're also very active in proposing new ideas, for example, on agriculture. They are also very active in coalition building with others, forming part, many of them, of the NPIA, for example, led by the European Union. And they are also very, very active on trade and climate change. Now, I do believe that more can be done. More can be done, for example, in presenting initiatives that are of particular relevance to developing countries. I'm thinking on the topic that is one very important in this House of food security, for example. I think more can be done in designing roadmaps to tackle some of those important trade distorting measures, such as subsidies. More can be done in terms of participating in negotiations to streamline regulations in emerging sectors. Digital trade, very important. And finally, I think it's also important the region still, for all its progress, still has 38% of people living in poverty. So it's very important for the region to prioritize policy measures that target the specific needs of disadvantaged groups.
Thank you very much for that. Cecile, concrete, please.
Thank you. Well, I agree with very much what has been said there. Of course, the European Union will continue to do its trade policy with bilateral or regional agreements, but I do think that it has an important role, and it has tried to play that role, but needs to step up even further to try to see with like-minded countries who you can advance. The European Union took the initiative to this MPIA, the Multilateral Interim Agreement, which now has a lot of members and is working. Why don't turn that to a plurilateral? If the US doesn't want to join, well, sorry. There are enough countries who are there and who are trying to see what can be done, because the WTO, the whole idea is to have some sort of enforcement mechanism. And we hope to restore one day the appellate body, and there is work ongoing there. That's excellent work. I know there's slow progress, but a little bit of progress. But until that happens, why not turn that into a plurilateral agreement, and with the maybe more Asian countries joining as well, because it is mirroring exactly WTO. It is not a competition to WTO. It is WTO rules. It's just that they are working while the others are not working. The same thing with the agreements on investment facilitation and on digital trade, or e-commerce, as it has been called. Let's see how we can move them forward. If not everybody is on board, okay, let's try to conclude with those who are. And I do think we do need to look at the issues of subsidies. You mentioned it both. And of course, this is not only WTO, but it is something that is creating a lot of tensions in the world. There are good subsidies. We need to subsidize the green transition. But there are a lot of bad subsidies as well. And it's creating a lot of tensions, not only within countries, but also between the sort of global south and global north. So try to look at it. We'll not have an agreement on it, but at least a place where we can have a conversation that countries sign up to say that, okay, we will follow those principles if it's not possible to push for an agreement, and also on the greening of trade. So I think be a little bit more affirmative in saying that we want to, there are enough of us who want to do this. And if you don't want to follow, well, too bad, step aside and then come back when you're ready. I know politically this is very difficult to do, because a lot of countries will say, well, if China and US are not in, we don't really want to be in either. But I think we need to think new if we want to save this organization, and if we are serious about establishing rules for the trade challenges that are here today.
Thank you. Now, at the danger of this moving away from all the happy talk, can I push you a little bit on the carbon border adjustment mechanism? Would this be a great place to talk about rules, multilateralism in a plurilateral sense, or plurilateralism in a multilateral sense?
Sorry. Absolutely. I mean, it's been talked about every day, I think. I think there's a formal case that China and India has brought on its WTO compatibility, but independently of that, that is absolutely a case to talk about. Because I think most economists agree that pricing carbon is a good way to achieve on the way to carbon neutrality. But we have so many different jurisdictions today, and they are kind of compatible, but not really. And then we also have the whole developing world who cannot comply with all these regulations. And also if you add a lot of others on due diligence and the deforestation and so on, even if they want to, and even if it makes sense. So discussing here how we can engage in helping everybody complying with it without creating unnecessary conflicts, because we have a goal we all want to achieve. We have all signed up, almost all of us have all signed up to the Paris Agreement. We have net zero ambitions, but not all countries can do it at the same way. So instead of creating artificial divisions here, we should absolutely discuss. But it is being done. This has been discussed here at every occasion and in every meeting. So absolutely a forum to discuss this and try to find a way forward.
Thank you very much for that. Maybe turn lastly to Marie. You gave a bunch of very concrete ideas, but let me throw this out. If you were king of the WTO or queen of the WTO, I think we probably need a king and a queen, actually. So, what would be the next JSI? What would be the plurilateral initiative which would help the organization stay relevant, stay moving forward, show that the silent majority can actually make progress? Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I know you're used to it. So
That's a hard one. Can I pick more than one?
sure, please. You're the queen.
I think e-commerce is already a progress, right? But obviously, digital is wider than e-commerce. So I think digital and even maybe AI, because that has the danger of becoming being determined unilaterally, and that's the other concern that I think we see. You don't want to have the world being divided by different technologies, right? Whether it's the telecom, the 5G, 6G discussion, or the whole. I think AI has no home at the moment, and there's a lot of discussion, and it should be discussed multilaterally. I think climate, I don't know whether climate, I'm not sure you want to have what kind of plurilateral agreement you would have on climate, but at least on how does trade and climate, the interaction between trade and climate, because that's a major concern for developing countries. So your point about CBAM is a great concern to developing countries, because we want to make sure this is not something which is going to be ending up with as protection, that it is really what its intention is to protect the climate or environment. But how do you do that? You need standards, you need to agree on the standards, you need to have maybe harmonization, and you need capacity, because developing countries are not, if CBAM standards are here and we are here, how do we get from here to here? This capacity building that's needed for developing countries, and a way forward, including how to do the MRV and so on. So there's a whole area there which we think, developing countries especially, feel that it needs to be discussed in a multilateral setting where we can also have a voice and a seat at the table.
Thank you very much for that. Annabelle, you look like you wanted to chip in.
I wanted to say sustainability and trade, several issues there, circular economy, plastics, fossil fuel subsidies, many issues that can be addressed in a plurilateral setting. And there are conversations, of course, here in the WTO, but maybe moving a step forward into this more joint statement initiative status.
Right. And that would happen at ministerial, or you would have to be happen at a ministerial, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it could happen at the General Council as well, but it can happen at a ministerial level as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Can I just interject on that point? Because I think we tend to focus on negotiations and G2G. Actually, a lot of things happen from processes. Because people, countries, developing countries, to build confidence, you got to know what you're talking about, right? So I'm just reflecting on the trade and environment debate, which started with Singapore issues. When was that? 96? Well, developing countries were just pushing back, until at some point, understanding it more in the process, including World WTO trade reports. You were saying about trade reports. You need to increase the understanding and the awareness to begin with, so before you get all the way to the negotiations.
Very good point. Now we have 10 minutes left, about 10 minutes left, and I would like to give the floor to Xiaosheng, if I can. Maybe you don't want to address India, but
Yeah, nobody addressed India.
to reflect on the broader message we heard. You were the first one really to bring up this middle powers, the silent majority, how to move forward. How do you see that actually happening and moving forward? Please.
Thank you very much. I think we had a very interesting discussion, but here I want to be. Adam mentioned that either lead or follow or get away. I don't think China will get away because China is firm supporter of multilateral trading system. If you check China's track record in WTO, China joined all the trade liberalization initiatives. China joined MPIA, also joined all the plurilateral joint initiatives. As a matter of fact, 2 of the joint initiatives, dialogue on plastic pollution, were launched and initiated by China and a few other developing countries. That's why I think now it's time for developing countries to speak up about their interests, about their position, to address the vacuum of leadership in the WTO. And I want to reinforce what Cecilia mentioned about things like CBAM. I think we just heard the strong statement by ICC a few days ago that they urge that members of WTO should resolve their trade frictions through multilateral trading system. I think it's very important to follow the business voice. And finally, I think, at least for me, I think for China, I don't think China can have any influence on the domestic politics, either in US or in EU. But what China can do is, number 1, to keep its economy and the trade open. Number 2, should continue to support multilateral trading system to help it deliver its mission.
Thank you very much. So why don't we come around to Adam, you make some comments, and then I'll open up. I have a third round, but I'm not sure we're going to get all that way. But maybe then I'll just open it up to give closing statement, or 2 minutes, final points you want to make after Adam, so you can think about that while Adam's speaking. Please, Adam.
Thank you, Richard. First, just a note. We tried to get an Indian representative on the panel. Didn't work out. Second, just briefly to respond to my colleague, Professor Yi. China can lead, and I would be very happy if China led. For China to lead, I would suggest 3 specifics right off the top. First, stop calling yourself a developing country. Second, come up with a constructive proposal on the exaggerated but real concerns about overcapacity in auto, steel, and a couple other things, rather than denying it's an issue. And third, come up with a constructive proposal picking up on something Annabelle said about what is a reasonable framework for supply chain diversification, all of which China is empowered, rich enough, large enough to do. Leadership isn't just putting things out there, it's putting things out there in the multilateral spirit that the WTO is about, and those would be three ways in which China could do it. And in so doing, if it shamed the US for its misbehaviors, that would be lovely. So let me finally turn. Richard talked about wanting us to be specific, and I'm grateful he did. And I would just say many of the specific things said by my colleagues, in particular Annabelle, Mary, and Cecilia, not to single ye out, but we were supposed to be the quieter ones because we want the third nations to talk, I think are very right. I think in particular the two pieces that from all the many beyond the general desire for plurilateral progress done through the WTO, abetted by the WTO, including Cecilia's point about dispute settlement, I think the two most important things to deal with are the subsidies code and the national security exception. The title of this panel, even though we've all sort of not addressed it directly beyond that, is about trying to keep, as Richard framed it, the globalization going in an age of worse geopolitics. I am confident we can do that, but if we can address those two issues head on, I think we would go a very long way. And in terms of specifics under each, just very briefly, as Cecilia knows better than anyone, was it 2018, the Buenos Aires Ministerial? 17. There were negotiations, not official, between Japan, EU, and US towards a subsidies code. And it would have been, unfortunately, not third nations, but if we had gotten some kind of proposal at that time out in front, we could have preempted a lot of problems. And I think it is, those proposals are still in the files, and the proposal, the world in that sense has not fundamentally changed. So I would go back to that, and not to be mean to China or India or anybody, but just as I said, you want to create something that like the US would want in. If it takes doing it such that it's presented as everybody else is doing this but not China, then China will want in, and it's its self-interest will. Final point on national security, and Mari and Annabelle were very good on this as well as Xiaoshun. One of the biggest faults of the US approach to this, as deliberately articulated by the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is to say, beautiful, high walls, high fence, small garden, whatever, pick your translation. But instead, they've deliberately kept the borders of the garden very vague and the walls invisible, like the invisible fence for dogs. When you get there, you get shocked, but you don't know where it is. This is irresponsible. So creating, if the US won't do it, and I've called upon them to do this, but if they won't do it, create some kind of transparent, reproducible index of dependence, of vulnerability, of concentration, whether it's Boeing Airbus in airframes, whether it's rare earths processing in China, whatever it is, come up with some kind of much more limited list that everyone can look at. And it may not be perfect, and it may be in dispute, but it's a lot better than having highly variable garden with invisible fence.
Thank you very much. Now, let me abuse my power as chairman here to just make a couple points. First of all, the idea that middle powers should be important is not new to this House. When we were trying to finish the Doha round, it was the middle powers who often came out to try and settle things out. Colombia, Norway, Switzerland, Chile, there was Singapore. Quite a number of countries came together. And that was actually very impactful. Because to start a momentum is different than allowing the chairman to prevent the discussion at the meeting at all. So if people get together and discuss it and it's starting to move, then the chairman can't say, okay, then we can't talk about that because it's moving, which is good. The second is this point on subsidies, and Annabelle said it as well as Adam. We need different rules. The climate rescue will require industrial transformation that happens faster than the market would do it. And that will require policy interventions, which will have trade effects. We want that. But we should discuss that, what it means. Not one country does it, another country does it. So it's an enormous area of what are good subsidies. Not new, because there are allowed subsidies in WTO. For example, R&D is okay. So we're used to this idea, it's bad subsidies, good subsidies, but we have to move that line and see how climate fits into it. Lastly, and Annabelle, you had the word resize national security, and Adam was saying to make the electric dog fence visible. I think that was a great one. But the idea of disciplining national security, when that was put in the post-war period, it was absolutely sensible. Countries were not really committed to these rules. And it went forward with never testing those, never thinking of it. It was like the nuclear button what nobody would touch, but somebody touched it. And now it needs to discuss, what does that mean? What are the limits? So for example, in subsidies or damages, we have ways of defining what is substantially all trade, what is damage, what is a large subsidy, how do you measure the subsidy, what's a subsidy, what's not a subsidy. We've developed very sophisticated ways of adjudicating very difficult, complex issues. We just haven't done that on national security. And so that I think would be another way to go forward. So I don't know how much can we go over? 1 minute? 5 minutes? Oh, 10 minutes. Okay, great. So we're going to go back through the panel, and I think I'll follow the original order, if that's okay. So Annabelle, Xiaosheng, Cecile, Adam, Mary, and then I will close. And please, 1 or 2 minutes each. Annabelle, start, please.
Just a quick comment, Richard, building on the historic angle that you were mentioning, that the Uruguay round was launched by a proposal, with a proposal that was called Café Olé, which was submitted jointly by Colombia and Switzerland. So there you go about the importance and the power of middle countries. So from my side, very quickly, I think it's the message is reignite the spirit of economic cooperation among the many. By reclaiming trade policy as a driver of growth, rebalancing national security and trade, and reforming the WTO rules, particularly on subsidies, on trilaterals, and on new initiatives to drive growth.
Oh, wow, thank you very much. This is one of the most disciplined panels I've ever been at. I think you guys all had maybe the apple, I don't know. Anyways, please. Now, the next on my list is Xiaosheng, please.
Well, I just want to say a few words about national security. I heard the discussion. I think it's a big issue for WTO. Unless that issue is addressed, then the WTO will become a kind of a paper tiger. I mean, nobody will take it seriously. Once you start viewing trade through a geopolitical rather than economic lens, everything can start looking like a national security concern. So I think that's an issue we need to discuss here in the WTO. And finally, like Martin Luther King, that I also have a dream, which is one day in the near future, the large economies, including US, EU, and China, can constructively work together again in the WTO, because in this interdependent and multipolar world economy, we share the same responsibility to ensure that we bolster global economic cooperation and we leave a strong and well-functioning trading system for future generations.
Thank you. Actually, we probably should have closed with that statement, but anyways, we're going to go on. I have a dream, and maybe that's how I'll close at the end. Thank you very much for that. Cecile, you're up next, please.
Thank you. The first time this public forum was held, there was a huge demonstration here. Lots of people, it went rather violent, lots of people demonstrating against WTO. Today we don't see many protests, but there is a feeling that WTO is really needed, more needed than ever. There are so many challenges, geopolitical, green, the national security, and we all name them here. And still, the international organizations, not only WTO, are weaker than ever. So maybe there would be a demonstration to make WTO stronger. But still, there is such a lack of political leadership acknowledging this. Instead, we hear leaders claiming that tariff is the solution to every problem of the world, and we know that that is not true. So those of us who believe in multilateral cooperation and in global rules and in the power of WTO to enable trade for the benefit of the whole world, we must come together. I wish your dream will come true one day, but until it does, those of us who dream broader, we need to come together and try to do what is possible right now.
Thank you very much. Adam.
You've heard a lot of unity of themes and of beliefs and even of action plans from this panel. I hope there's been enough difference that it's credible. This wasn't scripted, because it wasn't. But please, as the Director General said to us and gave us this opportunity to engage with you and people watching throughout the world, do take this as a call to action in the spirit that every member of this panel, including our distinguished moderator, has put forward. You don't have to solve everything. And sometimes even the US will be helpful. But you don't, in the spirit of what Cecilia just said, what Annabelle just said, don't wait around for China or the US or even the EU. Going back to the very start, and Richard started here, and Mari gets the last word, but I'll finish here. Globalization is not dead. The WTO is not dead. Even multilateralism is not dead. Trade is much more resilient than those who want to kill it are able to muster. Getting it managed so it goes for all the good goals that the people in this room share, that Annabelle articulated at the start, that's what it's about. So don't view this as existential, we're in danger. View this as our engine is not working as well as it once did. Let's try to keep it turning over in a better way. And you all are capable of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me go to the theme of this whole public forum, better trade, better world, was it? So how do we get better trade? I think is really what we all struggling with. One that, if we let the world be defragmented, bifurcated, and national security takes over the economics of it, there's going to be a lot of developing countries that's going to be left behind, especially the lesser developed ones and the poorer ones. And this is really, for me, something that really, we need to take action so that it doesn't happen that way. And I've spent the better part of my career for the last 30 years fighting for developing countries' voice in this kind of organization. So my call is in this call for constructive incrementalism, a call for different groups. It can be regional groups. In my part of the world, it would be ASEAN and East Asia. We need to get our act together to make sure that we can keep the bicycles moving. And, I had my experience through the Doha agenda, where different groups coalesced around different issues. And they can be developed, most of them were developing countries, but sometimes they were developing and developed countries. But they coalesced around issues, and it wasn't just to say no. This is really what I want to close on. easy to say no, we don't want to participate because we don't think it's going to benefit us. But we got to get to the, what was your word? Speak to the truth. Yeah, we've got to get the numbers out there and say, okay, we have a case. We as developing countries, we have a case. This is our case. This is how we think it should be done. But don't just say no. And this is in a oblique way to answer the question that was unanswered in this, in what you asked. And maybe one could learn from ASEAN. The reason why we were able to move forward is we introduced, we started with a consensus principle, but we discovered that we moved very slowly if we just stuck to the consensus principle. So we came out with a minus X way forward. You know, the X still participated in all the negotiations and so on, but they can choose not to join until they're ready to join.
Thank you very much for that. So I had prepared a half-an-hour speech. No, I'm teasing. I think I just want to quote a few things. I have a dream. We will be back. The fundamental reason you're all here, that this organization is so important, is trade is important. Trade makes people richer. Trade opens up opportunity. Trade expands exclusiveness. And that has nothing to do with geopolitical conflicts, and it will not change unless we allow it to tumble over into something incredible, which I don't see happening. So it may be a year or two, or 3 or 4, or 6 before we get back. But the fundamental logic of why this organization exists, why there are rules that are shared and embraced by countries all around the world. In fact, the GATT rules are in law of almost every country in the world. That's why they're respected, not because of the WTO, but because people put them into their laws because it made sense also for them. So that fundamental is not changing. So I'll end with that. If you looked at the trade numbers and tried to find where the WTO started dying, you won't see them. World trade's doing pretty good. When it stumbled was the global financial crisis, not the end of the Doha round. So let me end with that. Let's have a dream. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. Thank you very much. What? Let's turn off our mic.